A few years ago, a friend of my dad's handed me a book about apples and said, "I bet you'll never guess where apples come from." I gave it a guess, had a look in the book, and he was right. I couldn't. And it sent me on a years-long obsession that eventually ended
here. Hey, I'm Ross, and I'm on a mission to uncover the extraordinary origin stories behind everyday things. And in this episode of So Where's It From?, we're unearthing the true origin of one of the world's favorite fruits. It's inspired tech giants,
shaped stories and science for centuries,
sat in our fruit bowls for years, and yet most people have no idea where it actually comes from. To tell this story, I've come to Kazakhstan, the world's largest landlocked country, equivalent in size to the whole of Western Europe, and, as it turns out, the birthplace of the apple. To prove it, we'll be tracking down an ancient wild apple forest, hitting up an apple festival, tasting some incredible local varieties, meeting an apple scientist, and I'll eat apples that taste absolutely disgusting.
Oh, Christ.
Alha, Kazakhstan. In other words, let's go Kazakhstan.
This morning, I'm headed to an apple farm on the outskirts of Almaty,
Kazakhstan's largest city and former capital. The farm sits
in the foothills of the Tian Shan mountains, which all sounds quite epic, and I'm pretty excited because I get to learn about some local apple varieties.
As I pull up to the farm, the first thing I notice is the backdrop. Holy smokes. I then step into one of the orchards and it's already in mid-harvest, with people busy picking apples and packing them into crates.
We've met Vadim here, who is an apple picker.
I try a few interactions, but with the 5 Kazakh and Russian words I know, it's pretty limited. Luckily, I have Didada, my translator and guide, who is a total lifeline. After a few obligatory dad jokes,
Won't find any doctors around here.
Didada introduces me to our apple expert, Roman, the president of the Aport Apple Association.
Его стало очень мало. Вот этому саду 60 лет.
Within minutes of meeting us, Roman leads us into the grove, pointing out old gnarled trees and highlighting the variety he knows best, the Aport Apple. It isn't the original apple I've come to find, but its history is entwined with wild apples, and I'm keen to learn more. According to Roman, in the 1860s, apple seedlings were brought here from Russia and crossed with the local wild apple. The result was this, a massive, sweet, fragrant apple now known as the Aport variety, the pride of Almaty. And honestly, I get that pride because these things are massive and delicious.
Which damned?
At least I tried. While we're in the orchard, we also get to see another variety I've never come across, the candle snap. Tall, narrow, and nothing like I've seen before. Biting into both and comparing them, the giant Aport and the crisp candle, I can't help but think, these are pretty different from the Granny Smiths and Pink Ladies that I'm used to, which makes me realise I've never actually stopped to ask, what actually is an apple? Simply put, an apple is the round edible fruit of a tree that belongs to the rose family, the same family as strawberries, cherries, and actual roses. There are over 7,500 varieties of apples worldwide, each with different flavors, sizes, colors, and even crunchiness. Why so many? Well, apples have this extraordinary ability to reinvent themselves every time they reproduce, but we'll expand on that later. Oh, and roughly 25% of an apple is actually air trapped between the cells. That's why they float, and why every bite gives you that satisfying crunch. You're literally rupturing thousands of tiny cells at once. Speaking of crunch and apple varieties, the next day I head to the annual Almaty Apple Festival. Known locally as the Alma Fest,
Alma, meaning apple in Kazakh, festival.
It takes place on the last weekend of every September, features tons of apple varieties from local farmers, and has plenty of live music. My host for the day is Alexandra, who works with the Almaty Tourism Board, and to be honest, was an integral part of this whole episode. Now, it's here at the festival that I learned two things. The first, Almaty is very much the city of apples. New York, eat your heart out. There's the festival, there's apple art dotted all around the city, and the name itself, Almaty, comes straight from the Kazakh word alma, meaning apple. The second thing I learned is that apples have a surprisingly precise way of being judged. You've got the obvious criteria, size, taste, and appearance. Ugh. But then there's aroma, flavor complexity, and crunch. Turns out crunch is actually an official judging criteria, which means that candle's snap I had back at the farm must be doing pretty well. Wandering through the festival, it's really cool to see so many people appreciating their local apples, filling bags, arguing over prices, but I'll be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed by the sheer number of varieties. You've got pinks and yellows, tiny sweet reds and greens, mottled maroons, medium-sized greens, big greens, and more. Which leaves me with a question I just can't shake. If we like a certain apple variety, how do we grow it again and again? Apples are what scientists call extreme heterozygotes, which in simple terms means every single seed from an apple produces a completely different apple. No two are alike. So it's actually very normal and natural to have thousands of apple varieties. That's just what apples do. But here's the problem. If you find an apple you love, how do you regrow it? The answer? You clone it. The only way to guarantee that exact apple again is to take cuttings from the tree you love and then graft them onto the rootstock of another. The new branches and apples are genetically identical to the original. In other words, a clone. This is how apple farming works at scale. And it's why the apples you buy from a supermarket in Dublin, Tokyo, LA, Cape Town, or Cairo can taste exactly the same. They all trace back to a single original tree.
So this afternoon I've come to Almaty Botanical Gardens to meet a pomologist.
Called Anar, who specializes in apricots and apples. With me, I've got the garden's head of marketing, Alexandra, and Didara on translation.
I feel like we all need apples though, don't we?
To get us started, Anar walks us past the collections, through the gardens, past a few sheds, until we get to this restricted area. We step inside, walk through a grove of trees, and as we start to spot apples, Anar tells us what we're looking at.
Sieversii алмасын 170 сорт құланы өседі.
In other words, 170 types of Malus sieversii tree and their apples. The wild ancestor of every apple you and I have ever eaten.
Yo, this is so cool.
I'm in total awe, because the setting is spectacular, and I'm standing in front of the thing this entire trip was built around. As a little treat, I'm allowed to pick and taste one of these ancient apples, and there's a tree full of them, but I'm told that's been saved for an Italian production team. So I'm directed to this little number. I pluck, take a bite, and the result?
Yo, the colour and the taste, that is mad.
Okay, you're being a bit dramatic here, Ross, because it was unusual, but it did just taste like an apple.
Very appley.
This makes me a bit skeptical, so I ask Anar, via Didara, the obvious question. How do we actually know this is the wild ancestor of apples? It's not the first time she's heard this, and her answer starts almost 100 years ago. In 1929, a Soviet botanist named Nikolai Vavilov arrived in Almaty with a theory that the origin of any cultivated plant can be found where its wild relatives grow with the greatest diversity. So, when he found apple trees growing wild in the foothills above the city, densely tangled, unevenly spaced, and nothing like an orchard, he suspected he'd found the birthplace of the apple. He then published his studies, but it wasn't until 2010, after the first full sequencing of the apple genome, that his theory was finally confirmed. Filled with history and a decent dose of pomology, we start making our way out of the grove, and Anar tells me something that sobers the whole afternoon. The wild forests these trees and apples come from are nearly gone, around 80% cut down since the 1950s. The species is now officially listed as vulnerable, which is exactly why this grove exists. It sounds like a conservation problem, but it's actually bigger than that. Most apples sold worldwide come from a handful of varieties, clones over and over again. Same tree, same weaknesses. So if a disease beats one, it beats the lot. These wild apple trees are genetically very different, and somewhere in that difference is the resistance our apples might need. It's a lot to take on board, and it's a sad note to leave on, but it gives me this niggling desire to try and find one of these wild forests. So I ask Anar, Alexandra, and Didara whether that's even possible. All three give me the same answer. They're not easy to find. Challenge accepted. But before I start that search, how did this wild apple get from these mountains to the entire world? Before the apple became one of the world's favorite fruits, it went on a pretty incredible journey. It all started with wildlife. Bears, birds, and other animals carrying wild apple seeds through their digestive systems. Then humans got involved, tossing cores along trade routes or planting seeds on purpose. Eventually, this gave us the domesticated apple, aka Malus domestica.
Which, realistically, you and I would just call an apple.
Now, as traders went west through Central Asia and Iran, the apple went with them, crossbreeding with wild crab apples. At the same time, apples went east, mixing with wild species, leading to the sweeter varieties found in China today. By around 2000 BC, apples had reached the Mediterranean and were being documented on Mesopotamian tablets and even in poetry. In around 800 BC, apples were referenced in the Odyssey on more than one occasion. And by 50 BC, the Romans could list dozens of varieties. They'd also mastered the art of grafting, and as their empire spread, so did the apple, right across Europe. Some 1500 years later, colonizers started carrying apples around the world. But that's a story for another time. Right now, we've still got to find that wild apple forest. My organized trip was done, but I had a few days left in Almaty and one remaining fixation. The book that started all of this, the one my dad's friend handed me years ago, mentioned the wild apple forests of Kazakhstan, and I still hadn't found one. So I did what any curious person would do. I bought some apples for inspiration, rented a car, and drove into the mountains, using a few clues I found online.
So I've come an hour outside of Almaty to somewhere called Turgan Gorge, and the landscape is very beautiful.
I'm following a single sentence I found online. Something about vast meadows with old sieversii apple trees in Turgan Gorge. However, after a few roadblocks,
That is a lot of sheep.
I reached the end of the tarmac, then realized it's starting to get dark, and I have no idea how far these meadows are or whether I'll even find them. So I bail on my original plan and I try my luck in a local cafe. I ask if they know of any wild apple trees nearby, and to my surprise, they say, try the riverside. So I head off down a track, and within a couple of minutes...
What's that one there? How cool is that? This right next to me is a wild sieversii apple tree from the mountains of Kazakhstan. And this is what the apples look like. They're tiny. And the flavor? Oh, Christ. That's so bitter. And sour. And weirdly, kind of tastes like cardamom. Oh.
In hindsight, probably not clever to eat wild fruit off the ground. Oh well, yay for tomorrow. Now, dubious snacking aside, one lone tree by a river doesn't count as a forest. Slightly defeated, I head back to Almaty. That night though, I find another clue with slightly better directions. So, the next morning, I drive into the mountains with a friend called Roberto and head into another gorge. The setting is stunning. Autumn colours lighting up the route, the odd horse nodding in our direction. But about an hour in, we start to doubt the single line I'm going on. A picturesque birch grove above which you'll find wild apple trees. Problem is, the birch doesn't stop. So I sent up the drone and holy smokes, the landscape is incredible. Hold up. This deserves better music. After sending the drone off in every direction, I fly it past one last birch grove. And there they are, wild apple trees. We hike up to them, and it's exactly what Nikolai Vavilov described. Trees unevenly spaced, densely tangled, nothing like an orchard. There's even apples on the ground, which, in my excitement, straight in my mouth. And yep, still horrid.
Oh, that's so sour. Woo!
We wander through the trees, find a spot to sit, and I can't help but think about that book. About the years between reading it, planning this trip, flying to Kazakhstan, and now sitting in this forest. Whether these really were Malus sieversii trees, I still can't say for sure, but everything pointed to it. And honestly, being there felt like the best ending to an apple adventure I could have asked for.
So, if I sat down today with my dad's friend, I'm pretty sure I'd have a decent story to tell. But the bit that's really stuck with me in this entire apple adventure is that I've eaten so many apples in my entire life, thousands of them probably, but before being handed that book, I never stopped to think and ask, where do apples actually come from? So, next time you're choosing your apples, perhaps try a different variety. Think about the journey they've been on, and most importantly, think about their origins in the mountains of Kazakhstan.